Hello and welcome. I'm Becky McRae from Oklahoma.
And I'm Deb Brown from Iowa, and we are the co-founders of SaveYour.town. Today, we're talking about results from our survey of rural challenges. If you've got a comment, question, or even a story to tell, please just put it in the comment box below. We do answer your questions personally.
We have done our survey of rural challenges in 2015, 2017, 2019, and 2021. And in that time, over 1,400 rural people have told us what issues they most want help with. And they come from the US and Canada, also from the UK and Australia. And today we will be looking across all 4 rounds of the survey and drawing some large conclusions. So if you live in a small town, you may want to see how your challenges compare to challenges in other towns. And if you provide services or assistance to small towns in your organization, then you will definitely want to find out more about rural people's own view of their challenges. And if you cover rural stories for any type of media, you want to break through the shallow stereotyped coverage. You can do that by listening to the different challenges that actually matter most to rural people. When we look at how rural communities ranked the special challenges that happened to all of us in 2020, it helps explain some of the larger themes that we're going to be sharing with you today, because we found that rural communities didn't rank the pandemic or economic crisis as their top challenges. They remained more concerned with ongoing rural challenges at nearly the same levels as previous surveys from before the pandemic. Now, this was not due to a getting back to normal optimism because we had the introduction of vaccines or there were declines in active cases during the survey period. In fact, the survey was open from mid-October through the end of 2020. And that was when COVID cases were rapidly increasing across the US, UK, and Canada, repeatedly reaching new records. And those months included significant increases in rural areas as well. And the first vaccines weren't given emergency approval until mid-December, when most of the survey window had already passed. For rural people who answered the survey, long-term local challenges outweighed the impact of COVID-19 and the global economy. And this is the pattern that all 4 rounds of the survey revealed. People are more focused on a closely related set of ongoing challenges in their local communities. Now, these long-term local challenges include ones that you would expect in rural places, like population losses, lack of usable housing, the emptying of downtowns. And for rural small businesses, it includes trouble finding people to hire, stiff competition from online businesses, and the difficulty of marketing effectively. And then there are the hidden challenges, ones that often get overlooked outside of rural places, like leaders being too closed to new ideas and too resistant to change. Now, we think this focus on long-term challenges has big implications for people who cover small towns in the media, people who offer services and support to rural communities through their organizations, as well as the people who write the legislation and the policy that affects all rural areas. And what is most interesting to us is that this doesn't line up with either the stories we saw most often in the media or the messages coming from the organizations that serve rural people. So Deb is going to look at those common media themes first.
You're all familiar with the overused storylines of rural communities. Small town life is frequently either romanticized or politicized. Reducing rural life to a lovely pastoral idea is just as bad, I think, as reducing rural people to just their extreme political views. There are 2,700 small towns in the US alone, and that means any story is just that, one story. That's why a broader sample, like on this survey, is important to understanding the big picture of what more rural people are thinking. Media coverage matters even more because those stories also shape how other non-rural people think about rural places. It affects the organizations that decide the kind of services and support that are offered to rural areas. And it affects the policy discussions that drive legislation at the state and national levels. Since 2016, countless stories in the US media have focused on rural people's national political views. Don't forget all the opinion pieces on what rural people really think and what they ought to think and what's the matter with those people rants. Unsurprisingly, people with moderate political views got very little coverage compared to the more extreme views, which make better headlines. On this survey, rural people weren't focused on national politics. We found a few mentions of local policy and lots of mentions of local officials. In 2021, we did see the first mentions of national partisanship dividing people locally, but there were only a couple, and far more people spoke positively about the strong sense of connectedness in their communities. We think that because the people who answered the survey were the kinds of people who care about their local communities, no one brought up national politics as an important challenge that they were focused on.
Over the past 6 years, rural poverty has received a lot of media coverage, along with drug abuse and crime in rural areas. Since 2015, in-depth reporting has focused on these three issues as primary challenges in rural places: poverty, drugs, and crime, like they're always together, which they are. But that's not what rural people said on the survey. They ranked these three among the lowest of all community challenges. And that was true in 2021 and in 2019 and in 2017 and in 2015. These issues also seldom came up in the open-ended responses where people could talk about any issue they chose. Only a handful of people on each survey mentioned drugs or crime or poverty. Many other issues came up far more often. For example, in 2019, 3 times as many answers mentioned people opposing progress as a top challenge they'd like to have help with compared to poverty, crime, and drugs.
Another big theme in media coverage of small towns from 2015 to 2020 was the story of a lost factory, closed mine, shuttered mill, or damaging natural disaster. Now, of course, when a small town suffers such a terrible blow, it should make the news. And anniversaries offer reporters annual opportunities to follow up with stories that repeat the bad news and center around the negative narrative. How common are these disasters really out of the total number of small towns? And how much does a disaster weigh on rural communities, even years later? While there's no question that some towns have been hit with incredibly bad news, and some people remain deeply pessimistic even years later, this storyline doesn't show up as a top challenge in the answers to this survey. The choice, "Our town has survived a terrible blow," remained one of the least chosen options on the survey in 2015, 2017, and 2019. And in the open-ended responses, there were very few mentions of lost factories, closed mines, shuttered mills, or even damaging natural disasters. In 2021, considering how widespread the bad news was, we rewrote the disaster challenge as "This pandemic and economic crisis has really hurt our town." It's still ranked in the bottom 2 choices. Only a handful of open-ended responses including it, making the pandemic and economic crisis one of the least mentioned challenges. Those are just some of the common stereotypes we see in stories about rural people and places. But that's not the only disconnect we want to talk about today.
Now, the very first time I ran the survey of rural challenges, I was actually only asking people what topics they wanted me to write about on my site, Small Biz Survival. And that's why the questions say things like, which of these would you be most excited to learn more about? I never actually expected to share the results as some kind of a public report. But once I read what people told me about their towns, the challenges they were facing, and what they most wanted help with, I realized that other people needed to see this, especially people in organizations who serve small towns. For some reason, a lot of the services and assistance that I saw offered to small towns at that time simply didn't match what the people themselves were saying they most wanted help with. And that's still true today. Traditional rural economic development is a great example of this. The old school methods of answering corporate relocation queries or the RFP lists, or trying to recruit good factory jobs, this really fails to connect with the most important rural challenges people told us about. Although rural economic development often centers around creating jobs, this was one of the least mentioned challenges in this survey, all 4 rounds. In the first survey, 5 times as many people mentioned a lack of available people in the workforce than mentioned a lack of jobs. Recruiting outside firms to locate in small towns is an even bigger mismatch, especially seeking out national chains or franchises. Small town people simply didn't mention this as a possible solution to any of their challenges. Now, there were a very few people who mentioned a specific type of business they feel their town is missing or that they wish their town had. But most talked about finding a local person who could start that business to support. No one called for an outside savior business to swoop in and save their town. Instead, our survey results showed that rural people are more focused on the economic health of their downtown. Downtown business district issues were frequently mentioned, including the types of businesses downtown, the need to support downtown businesses, and the difficulty of drawing residents downtown for shopping and activities, and especially the tough competition with online and big chain retail companies.
Another traditional view of rural communities is they just need more grants or more outside funding. And occasionally, someone on this survey will mention grant writing, but usually looking for someone else to do it for them. Rural people seem to have good ideas of solutions they're pursuing and are managing to find the funding for the most part. Money simply didn't get mentioned as a challenge nearly as often as other issues. Needing more volunteers was mentioned far more often. Turns out people are more of a limiting factor than money for most small towns. How about the services offered to support rural small businesses and entrepreneurs? There's some big disconnects there as well. The relative lack of small business lending is often cited as holding back small businesses, especially in rural areas. But that didn't show up in any of our 4 surveys. The reality is that rural people say usable buildings are as hard or harder to find than loans. In 2015, 2017, and 2019, the inability to find a business loan scored in the bottom half of choices. In 2021, trouble finding a loan dropped to dead last. Crisis relief business loan packages most likely played a role in supporting small businesses in late 2020 when this survey was still open. Another possibly overlooked factor is rural self-reliance. Rural business owners may be more likely to avoid getting loans because they see themselves as independent. Many of us are reluctant to borrow because we grew up with our Depression-era grandparents drumming it into our heads, never mortgage the land. Despite all this, small business lending programs for rural areas get a lot of attention as assistance programs and in the media.
Another way that service providers like to support rural businesses is to help them write a business plan. We see this often as a prize in business idea competitions and also as a core service of many small business development organizations. The problem is that getting help with a business plan is one of the least commonly chosen rural business challenges. In all 4 rounds of the survey, needing help with a business plan ranked in the bottom half, and usually the bottom quarter of all small business challenges. Out of the over 1,400 people who responded to this survey over all the years, only 1 person mentioned a business plan issue. And that was asking how to integrate their nonprofit and their for-profit arms together. There are actually more comments from service providers upset that entrepreneurs don't want their help with a business plan or that they won't stick to a plan that was written for them. Now, we're not saying that all business plans are bad, just that small businesses don't seem to care about them. And by the way, no one mentioned wanting a business idea competition either. Now, as we're talking about these least popular offerings, at least according to the business people themselves, there's some other obvious winners here or losers. And for all of this enthusiasm that we see among educational institutions and service organizations about offering formal business training classes or entrepreneur boot camps, or we see them called often, there were exactly zero responses from entrepreneurs that mentioned an interest in them. 0 in 4 years out of 1,400 people. And the same with venture capital or angel investment funds, entrepreneurial ecosystems, and many of the other popular service offerings for supporting rural small businesses. Now, of course, people who don't spend their lives thinking about these solutions are unlikely to say that they need them. Still, it's striking how much of a disconnect exists between what people say they need help with and what services get offered to them.
Well, now that we've established what rural people actually are not thinking, let's look at what challenges are most on their minds. Across all four of the surveys, several big themes showed up consistently. These are the challenges that rural people mention wanting help with the most. The first and biggest is people's attitudes. While help, there's so much infighting in this town, doesn't rank in the top 5 challenges chosen most often, people open up about conflict as soon as we give them a place to type. On every open-ended question, the most common response has been about people's attitudes and behaviors that hinder progress. Problem attitudes range from apathy and a poor us attitude to resisting moving forward or accepting new ideas, all the way to open conflict. Now, you might think that conflict, active negativity, and infighting, especially among officials, leaders, and people who hold titles, would be the worst challenge. But resistance to new thinking was brought up just as often. When local leaders are not open to new ideas and are resistant to change, they're holding the community back from moving forward and from acting on suggestions or new ideas. The resistance keeps them from welcoming new people to the community and keeps those new people out of leadership positions. This is a recipe for stagnation and decline. In fact, Iowa State University studied 99 small towns over a period of 20 years. What they found was that the communities that were open to new ideas and new people in leadership were the towns that prospered the most. On our survey, other responses list the openness of their people. When we asked people about their community assets, we saw a lot of responses about their caring people, the strong ethic of volunteering, and their effective local leaders. These are the communities that will be moving forward. This is the biggest mismatch in rural services. Almost no assistance is offered to help rural communities be more open to new ideas. Decades of traditional meet and plan organizational methods apparently have not worked to address this challenge. Our idea-friendly method is one of the very few options available to help small town people shape their community to be more open to new ideas.
Now, the second big challenge over the long term is population. Now, this one feels a bit more obvious, as over half of rural counties in the United States have lost population in the last decade. Losing young people has been in the top 3 challenges all 4 times on the survey of rural challenges. Needing new residents has been in the top 5 in 2017, 2019, and 2021. And an overall decline in population and an aging population both are often mentioned in those open-ended responses where people can talk about any of their things. Now, this ties in with not enough volunteers, which ranked in the top 5 in 2021, was always in the top 10 before that. Another population-related challenge is conflict between different groups and cultures within communities. In 2019 and 2021, the survey asked people about ways their town was diverse. And both times, about twice as many people said their community was diverse or was increasingly diverse compared to the number of people who said their town was not diverse. Now, this is very different from the common impression of rural places as not diverse. Rural people have a broad view of diversity, and it's not just color, race, ethnicity, or cultural origin. They also mentioned age, education, skills, or technology use. They talked about businesses, professions, or commerce. And also there were a lot of mentions of cultures and ideas and ways of thinking, such as new versus longtime residents, or farm versus town residents, city urban people versus rural small town thinking, and full-time versus part-time residents, all of these as part of the diversity of their communities. People also mentioned gender spectrum and LGBTQIA diversity, income or class diversity, disability, family makeup, religion, political views, and military service in their diversity. And around 15% of people mentioned challenges with inclusivity or resistance, tension, or factions among the people in their communities.
The highest ranked small business challenge was the lack of good employees. It's been the #1 challenge in 2021 and 2019, and the top 5 before that. This is clearly tied to population losses, but it also points to an opportunity to help businesses with automation or remote workers. We think the largest challenge to small businesses is actually in marketing effectively. 3 different marketing related challenges have dominated the results. Online competition continues to move up, ranking 6th in 2015 and 2017, 3rd in 2019, and 2nd in 2021. Marketing isn't working, and tried being open later hours without success remained in the top 5. Difficulty getting people to shop and support local businesses is also one of the most commonly mentioned challenges in the open-ended responses. Competing locally, nationally, and online all at the same time would be challenging for anyone. Several business people mentioned the difficulty of keeping up with the changes in marketing. And many marketing solutions pitched at rural entrepreneurs are one-dimensional, like local shopping apps, online business directories, or social media marketing. Rural small businesses need broader marketing support to remain competitive.
We've presented the big themes from the Survey of Rural Challenges from 2015 to today. And if you'd like to see the detailed results from 2021 or any of the previous years, you can download those reports. They're linked just below this video. Now, we wanted to focus on the challenges in this video because that is the part people want help with and the part we thought you would find most interesting in your work. Now, there is much more that we couldn't get to today. In 2021 alone, people mentioned over 30 different challenges, and many of them mentioned multiple challenges in their community. Now, that really emphasizes the need for more customized support for each rural community and listening to local people. Poor housing quality or availability and the poor condition of downtown buildings were also commonly mentioned challenges. And we didn't focus on those today because we feel like rural serving organizations do address these issues. Now, besides the challenges, the survey also asked people about their community's assets. One especially interesting theme from 2021 was how many people talked about tourism, recreation, natural resources, and things like bike trails. And you can read more about these rural assets in the 2021 report. And we've linked it with all the previous result reports from 2019, 2017, and all the way back to 2015 below for you.
Well, now is a great time to pick up your pen, if you haven't already, and make a note of who you're going to share the Survey of Rural Challenges with right now, today. And don't forget to let us know your ideas, share your stories, or ask questions below in the comment box. We do answer all your questions personally. Thank you. I'm Deb Brown from Iowa.
And I'm Becky McCrae from Oklahoma. And together we are Save Your Dogtown.